You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Welcome to the show, Hilliard.
Nice to be back again, Jim.
Housing prices always controversial in British Columbia. The Premier saying she doesn't want to see a special tax put on vacant investment homes, whereas the Mayor really wants something done. He said young people can't afford homes in Vancouver, and his big concern is there will be a labor shortage because the people who work in Vancouver can't live in Vancouver. Is that a real concern?
Well, I think it is, and I think there's no requirement that says that a young person has to live in a particular city. If they can't afford the housing, then they'll look for a job elsewhere. And that's one of the interesting things that I think about might happen in the next couple of years in Canada is there's going to be very affordable office space and housing in Calgary and Edmonton because of the downturn in the energy sector. And if you have a company with a couple of thousand employees or something, and you're in an expensive head office environment like Toronto or Vancouver, considering moving to a cheaper location would make a lot of sense. And on top of that, there's going to be a bigger pool of available skilled labor in Alberta, and maybe perhaps other provinces too.
Well, all the head offices have already moved out of Vancouver and gone to Calgary, so I don't know if you'll see many more, but truly, yes, Toronto is very expensive. Yeah,
and that whole head office thing, it brings so many other benefits. I know in Toronto there's it used to be, and this is something I don't know that people realize, is that there used to be a requirement in the financial sector, which I've been in for more than 36 years. We had to locate our offices in the center of the city because there was actual securities. I know this is hard to imagine, but there was actually physical security. So somebody would bring in a physical certificate and they'd have to sign it on the back, and then we'd sell the stock for them, and then they'd get their check. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we had to deliver the securities to a vault, which is usually the main branch of a bank. And we had couriers that walked around, and I'm sure the same thing in downtown Vancouver, and I know for sure in Toronto, they would have all these couriers walking around with these certificates, and it was all settled every night at the end of the trading day. And of course, that doesn't happen anymore. It's all electronic now, or pretty much 99.8% electronic. So there's no actual physical need anymore for these places to be in the downtown branches of the big cities. So there's going to be a revolution in the financial industry, and it's going to affect real estate, because if it gets too expensive in one place, they can move. Now, it's hard to imagine the Royal Bank of Canada or TD Bank moving to Regina, for example. I think that might be a stretch. But if it does get too expensive, they've got flexibility and options that they never had before.
Well, I find it hard to imagine why offices now, for the majority of people, require them to drive, long distances from the suburbs into the central city to work in a central office, when all they're going to do is sit down at a computer terminal that you could put anywhere.
Exactly, and like all that time in traffic and that automobile and then the parking, it's expensive. I'm sure it's probably very expensive in Vancouver. And then all the cost of building all the LRT and everything. If people didn't have to assemble in the same location every day for however many hours, there would be a tremendous improvement in efficiency. There's hours of productivity wasted every day, millions of people in North America. There's not. Now, maybe it'll be solved with cars that drive themselves. So you could be in the car, but you don't have to be worrying about driving. You can be working away while you're in the car. But it still begs the question of why do we move all these people around when they can do their work from a terminal? Now, if you've got, if your home situation isn't that maybe a lot of people can't work from home for some reason, then there has to be maybe regional locations they could go to where they could sign in, log in on the computer, and work in a quiet atmosphere.
Is there any way for governments to influence affordable housing? I mean, I've heard Calgary, the city will make your down payment if you're willing to live in their city and work there. Is that true?
I don't know if it's very, all the attempts at at doing that have been disastrous. Like, for instance, right now there's a help to buy scheme in England where the government helps you buy a house, and all it did was push the prices in London even higher, and the houses became even more unaffordable. So they're starting to talk about rent controls, for example, as another thing. There are rent controls in New York still today. I don't think there's ever been. Well, I don't know. There probably has been rent controls in maybe Toronto or Montreal at one time. I don't know, but they'll start talking about bringing that back. But those government programs, all they seem to do is just distort things and make them worse. You know, it's a very in Alberta in the early 80s when interest rates went up to 18%. They had a program. If your mortgage was more than 10%, the government would send you a check for the difference to bring your actual cost of the mortgage down to 10%. I'd actually forgotten about that, and a client of mine reminded me of that a couple of months ago.
Saskatchewan did the same thing for both home mortgages and farm loans. They guaranteed them to stay below a certain rate. Yeah,
but the magic of those things is, of course, politically it's wonderful because the people get a check from the government every month, and that makes them feel really good. So there's that. It has to, but it's unlikely that you could model a really good program. And so I don't know what the Premier of BC can do or the Mayor of Vancouver can do. It's just, when you see the numbers that came out a couple of days ago, was it a 14% increase in single-family homes year over year or something like that, and the same and similar in Toronto. Of course, we're not seeing that in Edmonton and Calgary anymore. There's even more houses for sale, especially in the upper levels, so above $1 million. There's just an ever-increasing supply of homes for sale, and I really don't think there's very many buyers out there. There's lots of buyers interested in $300,000-$400,000, and apparently those houses are and apartments, condos are selling well, but in the higher end, the market's just really ground to a halt. I don't think prices have come down much yet because there's that long pause that happens where the sellers are stuck at their price and the buyers are few and far between, so they're just kind of lack of activity is what is the first symptom you see. But I know the activities. I've talked to a couple of lawyers just yesterday. I was talking to two of them, and they said there's almost no transactions that they're getting asked to work on, and there's no loan applications either, which is more of a commercial thing, but it's very, very slow.
Is there any hope that the energy sector is going to make a quick bounce back, or is there the feeling that this is going to take some time, if ever?
Well, what's going to happen before the end of June, that's only a short time away, is the new energy regulations are going to be brought in by the NDP government. So that'll be very interesting because there has been some talk of a carbon tax. I was doing a little work on that this week, and I was interested to find out that BC has a carbon tax and Sweden has a carbon tax, but there's very few other places in the world that have carbon taxes. And what I read was that the carbon tax in BC has worked really well. It's lowered the consumption of carbon-based fuels, and it's revenue neutral, apparently. They cut taxes equivalent to the amount that they raised on the carbon tax. And of course, with the NDP government, we've had one for about a month now. Well, actually, they just got sworn in, I think, so we haven't had them for the whole month. But I don't know what their plan is. But it would be a big change in Alberta if something like carbon tax were brought in.
I know in BC, what they'd like to see is that carbon tax used to support public transit, and the government says no way. And so to the average person, it doesn't make a lot of sense. They're holding a referendum right now, counting the votes on whether the people in the lower mainland of Vancouver want to pay an extra 0.5% in sales tax to support transit. And we already have the highest gasoline taxes in Canada. A big hunk of that goes to transit. People, I think, are fed up with being taxed to death to support transit.
Yeah, we don't have that. We don't really have. Well, we have transit in Edmonton, but it's pretty sparse. And I remember working in Toronto briefly for many years ago, and taking the subway to work downtown in Bay Street, and it was wonderful. There was everybody was on the subway, and there's CEOs of companies there and financial analysts, and but you don't see that in Edmonton. I don't know about Vancouver, but most people say no, I don't want to ride the subway, so therefore I don't want to pay for it either, right? That's the
SkyTrain system in Vancouver.
You got to get the higher income taxpayers using it, and then they'd be willing to support it.
Well, everywhere they've put SkyTrain in Vancouver, it's packed.
Yeah.
And if you build it, they will come. I mean, I'm along the original SkyTrain line in Burnaby where there was virtually nothing. And now we have the biggest shopping mall in Burnaby, and the entire line of the track is nothing but high-rise apartment buildings. So if you build it, at least here, they will come.
Well, especially with the traffic problems there are in Vancouver. And
the worst traffic congestion in North America.
Yeah, well, Toronto's not a whole lot better. I mean, Toronto, I've been there several times in the last year, and I can't believe how long it takes to get in from the airport to downtown. It's a nightmare, really. It's just incredible. And
well, we now have a subway that does that.
yeah, and they're actually going to have one too. I think that's in the works. But you know, the reason the carbon tax in BC won't go to pay for the subway is that they made it revenue neutral. So the carbon tax doesn't actually generate any new money, and I don't know what tax they cut when they brought in the carbon tax.
Apparently, it goes to friends of Gordon Campbell. Is what a lot of people say happens to the carbon tax. So I don't know how revenue neutral that is, but they're certainly glad to have it.
Yeah, well, I don't know what's going to happen in Alberta in the next few months, but it's going to be interesting. Of course, the oil industry will say that this is the last time you'd want to be messing around with anything like a carbon tax or anything like that. But the problem is, Canada is rapidly losing credibility on the international scene. There's a big meeting coming up in the fall, and even if we got rid of all of our coal-fired electricity in Alberta, which is the biggest source of electricity in Alberta, we still wouldn't even come anywhere near close to meeting our targets for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. BC is great because it's got all the hydroelectric power. And Ontario's phased out their coal, and they've got nuclear and hydroelectric. And Quebec, of course, has vast amounts of excess hydroelectric. So, unfortunately, in Alberta, we have the two big sources, the oil sands and the coal-fired electricity. So, it's going to be very controversial, whatever happens in Alberta. And then, of course, we got an election federally coming in October. So, Justin Trudeau's in town this weekend. So. And Joe Oliver, I saw him yesterday. I don't know exactly why he's here. But
well, usually to shovel some money out of the back of a truck to buy votes.
Well, I could be. He was meeting with some. I saw him actually. It was in a patio outside, and he was meeting with some business people. So maybe that's exactly what he's talking about. And the federal government has to come to terms with this oil industry and the greenhouse gas emissions as well, and I think they probably are. So far, the finance minister, Joe Oliver, has said that there's no housing bubble, except in Toronto and Vancouver, he said once. Sometimes he says there's no housing bubble at all, and other times he says there's no housing bubble except in Toronto and Vancouver.
Your two most populous cities with growing populations.
So it's not a bubble as long as it's only Toronto and Vancouver. Well, that's got to be like a huge percentage of the population, and it's affecting everybody. So, and you know, the prices, if they go up 11, this is probably
that's only about a third of Canada's population.
Exactly, and probably 40% of its housing wealth, if you like, housing assets is a better word than wealth. So if there's a bubble there, then there's a bubble. But and both Vancouver and Toronto, the incomes did not support the prices before this latest increase. So now it's even more stretched in terms of, you know, in Toronto, it was about 6 times the house price multiple of household income, which is way beyond the normal three times maximum that you see. And of course, everybody's heard in Vancouver, it's like something like 11 times. But that was data from December of last year. So with these latest increases of 10, 14%, it's even more stretched. You know, that would be almost 7 times in Toronto and 12 or 13 times in Vancouver. So it's just completely unsustainable. And prices in the U.S. are only a little bit more than half of our average price in Canada. And even there, reports come out. There was another one today saying that first-time buyers there can't qualify for their homes, and their incomes aren't a whole lot lower than the incomes in Vancouver and Toronto. So it's a pretty bizarre situation.
Well, in Vancouver, surveys have found that nearly half of new home buyers are being supported by mom and dad. The
bank of mom and dad, we call it, yes. And you know, the problem with that, of course, is you want what you want. Going back to what you said a minute ago about jobs, and attracting good people to work there is you don't want just the people, the small 1% of people who have a bank of mom and dad that they can allow them to buy a house. Is you want the best people for the job, and some of the best people may not have a bank of mom and dad that can help them buy a house. So you might lose the chance to hire that person because they just can't afford to live there. Myself personally, I think renting is for the entry level people is one of the solutions. So renters can live more or less anywhere they want, and if they want to go and chase a job in a particular place, renting makes a lot of sense because they can live closer to work. They may not even. I know one young couple in Edmonton here. They live downtown. They don't even have a car anymore. They use Pogo, which is some kind of car rental service where you've got car to go, I think, in Vancouver. And,
there's a number of car co-ops here. Plus, if you live in Yaletown or the West End, for most people, walking to work is very realistic, or riding your bike. So and you can ride your bike here all year round, too.
Exactly, but the thing is, if you insist on owning, then it's going to be very difficult. Maybe a condo possibly, but there's no way living within walking distance to work is going to work if you have to insist on owning. So the two that go together are renting and living close to work. All of the new development in Edmonton right now for housing is rental. There's almost nobody left that's building. Well, actually, Brad Lamb, the condo king, has got from Toronto, has got a site and he's got a trailer there to accept deposits, but there's no construction activity yet. He's doing one in Calgary as well, but other than that, the developers in Edmonton are building rental housing and high-rise rental. And of course, that's a different build. The units are smaller. They usually don't have balconies. The windows are smaller. It's more modest, but it's also much more affordable.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, are people going to just have to give up on the idea of that single-family home with the picket fence and the big backyard for the kids, where it's not so scary for people to grow up in an apartment as long as there's lots of room to play outside in parks?
You wonder, I live really close to an off-leash dog area, and it seems like thousands of people go there sometimes twice a day to walk their dogs. And I imagine they'd be doing it whether they lived in the home with the white picket fence or whether they lived in an apartment. But, it's part of big city living, I think, that people live in apartments because that's what they can afford, whether they own it as a condo or whether they just rent it. And I think it's maybe something North Americans will have to get used to. I did find out in my research that the three countries in the world with the most square feet per person are Australia, United States, and Canada. And so it's not a lack of space in Australia, and well, none of those three places actually has a lack of space like you might say would be the case in London, England, or something like that. But it's just we've spread out. We've got all this extra space, so we've spread out, and sprawl is the thing. And we probably don't need anything like the space that we have. And
well, in Vancouver, the big trend is that they're buying up blocks of single houses and turning them into high-rises along the SkyTrain routes. That's the trend.
Yeah.
And
there's
younger people.
Wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, in Europe, they've lived in apartments forever.
The numbers, it was like 76 square meters in North America, roughly. These are roughly the numbers, versus 35 in France and Germany. And there's lots of wealthy people, highly educated, sophisticated people in France and Germany, but they're just used to living in much smaller quarters. And that we may just be people that take up too much space. And even if you go back into a baby boomer's lifetime, a lot of us grew up in 1,000 square foot houses, or maybe 1,200 square feet if our family was a little wealthier, and there might have been 3 to 5 kids in that house. So it's possible to do it. With one bathroom, I remember, too. So I don't think people today would probably be able to go back to that. But
well, we had a family of 5 in a 48-foot trailer. So there you go. There's not a lot of room to swing a cat in there.
You can do it. It's, but I guess.
But also your parents kicked you outside every chance they got.
Exactly. I remember getting kicked outside when I was a kid. I actually lived in Vancouver into the rain, and I didn't mind going out in the rain. I just didn't want to put I remember not wanting to put the slickers, remember the yellow slicker? I didn't want to put that on. I just wanted to go out in the rain and get wet, it's, nowadays everybody has their own room, their own TV, their own computer. They never have to go outside again, right? They just stay inside and,
just put them in their people pod. I guess
but
if
in the office building space, it's completely changing. People are going to much less space per worker in TELUS in Alberta. I don't know about it, TELUS in BC, but in Alberta they're doing a new building in Calgary, and they're going to have much less space per worker. They had to build a new building because there was a fire safety limit as to how many people you can put on each floor. So there's empty buildings owned by TELUS in Alberta, and there's brand new buildings under construction with and of course there's the whole thing about office desk sharing as well, where you don't have your own desk assigned, you share a desk, and the idea is you're not both there at the same time, you alternate. And the whole idea of sitting at a desk maybe is going away. Maybe Jim will be able to just wear our Apple iWatches and never go to an office again. I don't know.
Well, I work at home, so I don't go to the office, except the one in my own office. So commuting, yeah, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, office. It works for me.
Work. You're saying that you walk to work.
3 or 4 steps every day. My big challenge is getting outside.
Yeah, and also, I guess, well, of course, your job, you've got lots of contact with people like we're doing now, but I have heard that not going downtown to the office is good, but there's one big negative is people need that interaction with coworkers. So there would have to be some way to, whether it be with Skype or maybe one day a week when everybody shows up at the office and has a few meetings and stuff. I don't know, but
well, I know when Yahoo got a new CEO, she declared that they had to stop working at home and come into the office, and she said productivity went up because they could interchange ideas a lot better. Whereas if you have to email somebody or phone them, well, that takes time out of your day. Plus, I think although bosses don't like people gathering around the water cooler or the coffee machine, that's where a lot of ideas do come around, where somebody will say, I'm really having trouble with that Adams account. And someone will say, oh, yeah, I had the same kind of problem last week, but here's how I solved it. Maybe you want to try it. And that's the kind of conversation that doesn't happen when you work from home.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just thinking out loud, but I guess you wouldn't want to put that in an email either. You wouldn't email somebody and say, I can't figure out how to do this, because maybe it's a really dumb question, right? But around just in the hallway, you don't mind asking a really dumb question when it's just 2 people. And they could say, oh, I know how to do that, and then 5 seconds they give you the answer. But you're not going to put that on an email because it could be embarrassing. So there's got to be a way to do it better than what we're doing now, where everybody gets in their automobile all by themselves and travels for 30 minutes to an hour in a big traffic jam and goes to an office and sits in their space. A lot of times people go to the office and they email each other even though they're only seated 50 feet away.
Yeah, and you could do that from home again too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
so a time to take a look at a new attitude towards housing and a new attitude towards business.
I think so, and that's where getting back to, I know we started talking about housing, but office space in Edmonton and Calgary. I don't know about Toronto and Vancouver, but Edmonton, Calgary.
Vancouver's got a lot of vacant space because of the downturn in the mining industry, which was centered here.
Exactly, and there was that I talked to a developer from Toronto, and he's it's not my field, but we were chatting away about this, and he said, you know what, if there's cheap money and the money's available, developers build, and they build what they know how to build. So if they know how to build office spaces, they build more office spaces. They don't forecast the future demand, and they don't go into long discussions about the kind of thing we're talking about right now. They built 3 office buildings, and they were all successful. They'll build a 4th one, right? It's just what they do. And as long as they can get the financing, that was the bottom line. The financing is the key. And so occasionally they're going to build too many. And then if you layer on top of that a demographic change or a change like we're talking about, a work from home thing, that could be very interesting and very, very devastating. Now, If the price comes down too low, though, then the market economy will adjust, and they'll say, "Wow, we can get that office space for practically next to nothing. We're going to grab it because we'll find a way to use it." And that's what's going to be happening here in Edmonton and Calgary very soon. And maybe startup companies. The problem in Edmonton and Calgary was a shortage of good people to work, and that's not going to be a problem. There's going to be lots of engineers and technology people that'll be available because of the layoffs, and so new companies, new ideas could hire those people, get some cheap office space, put the next Apple or something like that together right here in Edmonton or Calgary or Vancouver. Well, probably more likely to happen in Vancouver, I guess, because Vancouver already has a technology kernel of companies.
Hilliard, thank you very much for chatting with us.
It was nice to talk to you again, Jim.
And as usual, sometimes theory overcomes fact, but we're reaching a stage where you're right. Something's going to have to be done about expensive housing. And where do you work next? My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton, and author of the book When the Bubble Burst: Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. His website, richardsongmp.com/web/macbeth.team. You're listening to HoweStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward comments about the show to info@HoweStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HoweStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HoweStreet.com radio is a production of HoweStreet Media Incorporated.